Have you ever noticed how the moment everyone leaves and silence fills the room, something shifts inside you? Not relief, not peace, but something else entirely. A subtle discomfort that seems to emerge from nowhere, like a shadow that only appears when the lights dim. It's not the absence of others that disturbs you, it's the inevitable presence of yourself. Imagine sitting alone in your room right now with no notifications buzzing, no conversations demanding your attention, no tasks pulling you in different directions, just you and the silence. How long before you reach for your phone? How long before you find something, anything to fill that space? Because in that silence, something profound and unsettling emerges. The realization that you might be running from the most important person in your life, yourself. This isn't about loneliness in the way most people understand it. This is about something far more fundamental, something that cuts to the very core of human existence. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, one of the most penetrating minds to ever examine the human condition, saw this discomfort not as a weakness, but as a spiritual alarm, a call to authenticity that most of us spend our entire lives trying to silence. When you're alone, truly alone, the performance ends, the masks come off, the carefully constructed version of yourself that you present to the world begins to crumble, and what remains is raw, unfiltered, and often terrifying. It's the distance between who you are and who you think you should be. It's the gap between your authentic self and the character you've created to survive in a world that rewards conformity over truth. Kierkegaard called this existential despair, not the temporary sadness that comes from external circumstances, but the deep, gnawing realization that you've been living as a stranger to yourself. It's the silent abyss that opens when you recognize how far you've drifted from your own essence, how much of your life has been spent performing rather than being. But here's what makes this so crucial. This despair isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that something is finally right. It's your soul's way of saying, stop, listen, remember who you are. Because the alternative, the endless cycle of distraction, the constant need for external validation, the frantic pursuit of anything that will silence the inner voice, is not living, it's surviving. Think about your daily routine. How much of it is designed to avoid this encounter with yourself? The endless scroll through social media, the compulsive checking of messages, the back-to-back meetings, the constant busyness that feels productive but leaves you empty. We've created a world where being alone with our thoughts is almost impossible, where silence has become the enemy and distraction the savior. But what if we've got it backwards? What if the very thing we're running from is the thing that could set us free? Arthur Schopenhauer, another giant of philosophical thought, saw solitude not as something to be feared, but as something to be embraced. For him, the ability to be alone wasn't a weakness, it was a mark of greatness. It was the sign of a mind that didn't need external noise to feel alive, of a soul that had found its home within itself. While Kierkegaard showed us that the anguish of being alone is a call to authenticity, Schopenhauer revealed that mastering solitude is actually a form of spiritual strength. He believed that elevated minds naturally seek solitude, not as an escape from the world, but as a refuge from its mediocrity. The shallow conversations, the empty social rituals, the constant performance, all of this becomes exhausting when you've tasted the richness of your own company. But here's where it gets interesting. Both philosophers understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to grasp. The emptiness you feel when you're alone isn't actually loneliness. It's longing. It's your psyche's way of telling you that you've lost touch with the most important relationship of your life, the one with yourself. From the moment we're born, we're taught to look outward for validation. We learn what success looks like, what beauty means, what love should feel like, all through the lens of others' expectations. We adapt, we conform, we perform. We become so skilled at being what others want us to be that we forget who we actually are beneath all the layers of conditioning. The result is a profound internal dissonance. We create an identity that works in the world, functional, acceptable, successful, but it's not authentic. It's a construction, a persona, a mask. And when we're alone, when there's no audience to perform for, this mask begins to slip. What emerges is often painful. The wounded child who never felt good enough, the authentic desires we've buried, the fears we've never faced, the parts of ourselves we've rejected in order to fit in. This is why silence can feel so threatening. It's not empty, it's full of everything we've been avoiding, everything we've pushed down, everything we've refused to acknowledge. The phone calls we make to avoid thinking, the Netflix binges that numb the mind, the social obligations that fill every weekend. They're all elaborate strategies to avoid the one conversation that matters most, the one with ourselves. But what if instead of running from this discomfort, we learn to sit with it? What if we understood that the pain of being alone is actually the birth pains of becoming whole? Because on the other side of this confrontation with ourselves lies something extraordinary, the ability to be truly present, to make decisions from a place of authenticity rather than fear, to love others without need rather than dependency. The transformation from loneliness to solitude isn't automatic. It requires something our culture rarely teaches: the courage to be uncomfortable, to sit with uncertainty, to face the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. It requires what Kierkegaard called the leap, the willingness to choose authenticity even when it's painful, even when it means disappointing others, even when it means admitting we've been living a lie. This is where the real work begins, not in the company of others, not in the noise of the world, but in the silence of your own presence. It's in that silence that you begin to hear the voice you've been drowning out, the voice of your authentic self, waiting patiently for you to stop running and start listening. The question isn't whether you can handle being alone. The question is whether you can handle being with yourself. Because until you can, every relationship will be an attempt to fill a void that can only be filled from within. Every achievement will feel hollow. Every moment of happiness will be tinged with the fear that it might disappear, because it's built on a foundation of sand rather than the solid rock of self-acknowledgement. The journey from loneliness to solitude begins with a single, terrifying realization: you have been living as a refugee from your own life. Every distraction, every compulsion, every desperate reach for external validation has been a way of avoiding the one person you can never escape: yourself. And this avoidance has a price that compounds daily, like interest on a debt you never knew you were accumulating. Modern life has perfected the art of self-avoidance. We wake up to notifications, fill our days with endless tasks, and fall asleep to the glow of screens, all in service of the same desperate goal: never having to be alone with our thoughts. But this strategy, while effective in the short term, creates a devastating long-term consequence. We become strangers to ourselves, living in a beautifully decorated house that's completely empty inside. The emptiness you feel when you're alone isn't actually emptiness, it's the echo of your own absence within yourself. It's the psychological equivalent of phantom limb syndrome, where you feel pain in a part of yourself that you've unconsciously amputated. You've cut yourself off from your own essence, and the pain of that disconnection manifests as loneliness, anxiety, and a constant feeling that something is missing. But here's the profound truth that both Kierkegaard and Schopenhauer understood: this pain is not a problem to be solved, but a signal to be heeded. It's your psyche's way of calling you home to yourself. The emptiness isn't a void to be filled with external things. It's space to be inhabited by your authentic presence. The transformation begins with acceptance, not the passive acceptance of resignation, but the active acceptance of a warrior who chooses to face the truth rather than live in comfortable lies. You must first acknowledge that there is a void, that you have been running, that the person you present to the world may not be who you actually are. This acknowledgement is not self-criticism, it's self-compassion disguised as honesty. From this foundation of acceptance, the real work begins, the work of self-archaeology. Just as an archaeologist carefully excavates layers of earth to uncover ancient treasures, you must carefully excavate the layers of conditioning, expectation, and fear to uncover your authentic self. This process requires tools that our culture rarely provides: silence, solitude, and the courage to sit with discomfort. Silence becomes your laboratory. In the absence of external noise, you begin to hear the subtle whispers of your inner voice, the voice that knows what you truly want, what you actually fear, what you genuinely value. But this voice has been drowned out for so long that at first it may sound foreign, even frightening. You've become so accustomed to the loud, demanding voices of others that your own voice seems weak and uncertain. This is where the practice of solitude becomes essential. Solitude is not just being alone, it's being alone with intention, with presence, with the willingness to encounter whatever arises. It's the difference between hiding from yourself and seeking yourself. In true solitude, you become both the observer and the observed, the student and the teacher, the seeker and the sought. The practice begins simply, moments of intentional silence where you resist the urge to fill the space with distraction. You sit with whatever arises, the anxiety, the restlessness, the sudden urgency to check your phone or find something to do. You observe these impulses without judgment, recognizing them as the withdrawal symptoms of a mind addicted to external stimulation. As you develop this capacity for inner presence, something remarkable begins to happen. The silence that once felt threatening begins to feel nourishing. The solitude that once felt like punishment begins to feel like privilege. You start to discover that you are not boring company, you are fascinating company. You have thoughts, insights, and perspectives that have been waiting years for someone to listen to them. That someone is you. But the transformation goes deeper than comfort with solitude. It touches the very foundation of how you relate to the world. When you are no longer running from yourself, you stop seeking others to complete you. You begin to approach relationships from a place of wholeness rather than neediness, of overflow rather than emptiness. You love others not because you need them to fill your void, but because you have something genuine to offer from your own fullness. This shift changes everything. Your decisions become more aligned with your values because you actually know what your values are. Your goals become more meaningful because they arise from your authentic desires rather than external expectations. Your relationships become more satisfying because you're no longer asking others to be what you refuse to be for yourself. The person who has learned to transform loneliness into solitude possesses something rare in our connected age, the ability to be genuinely present. They are not constantly looking over their shoulder for approval, not frantically filling every moment with activity, not desperately grasping for external validation. They have found their center, their home, their sanctuary within themselves. This doesn't mean they become hermits or misanthropes. On the contrary, those who are comfortable with solitude often become the most genuinely social people. They engage with others from choice rather than compulsion, from strength rather than weakness. They can be alone without being lonely, and they can be with others without losing themselves. The path from loneliness to solitude is not a destination, but a practice. It requires daily recommitment to the relationship with yourself. It means choosing consciousness over unconsciousness, presence over distraction, authenticity over performance. It means being willing to disappoint others in order to be true to yourself, knowing that authentic relationships can only be built on a foundation of self-honesty. There will be moments when the old patterns reassert themselves, when the pull of distraction feels overwhelming, when the silence feels too loud to bear. This is normal. This is part of the process. The key is not to judge these moments, but to recognize them as opportunities to practice, to choose differently, to come home to yourself once again. The person who has made this journey, who has learned to be their own best company, who has transformed the pain of loneliness into the power of solitude, becomes a beacon for others. They show by their very presence that it's possible to live authentically, to be whole, to find within themselves what others spend their entire lives seeking outside. This is not about becoming perfect or never feeling lonely again. It's about developing the capacity to be with whatever arises, to find in your own presence a source of strength, wisdom, and peace. It's about recognizing that the emptiness you've been running from is actually the space where your authentic self has been waiting to emerge. The choice is yours. You can continue the exhausting dance of avoidance, filling your life with noise and distraction while the essential conversation with yourself goes unheard, or you can choose the path of courage. The path that leads not away from yourself, but toward yourself. Not into the crowd, but into the sanctuary of your own authentic presence. The silence is not your enemy, it's your teacher. The solitude is not your punishment, it's your gift. And the person you've been running from, they're not a stranger to be feared, but a friend to be welcomed home.